question.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Brantford, Brant South, Six Nations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations on your appointment. This is my first substantive opportunity to speak in the 45th Parliament. And before I speak on Bill C-2 today, allow me to begin with a few words of thanks. To my election campaign team, thank you for your commitment, your long hours, and your belief in what we stand for. Every door you knocked, every conversation you had helped bring us here. To my family, my spouse Angela, and my twin daughters Jenny and Emma, thank you for your love and your patience. This job is demanding, takes me away from home, from holidays, from dinners, but your support never wavers, and I'm forever grateful for it. And to the great people of Brantford, Brant South, and Six Nations, thank you for trusting me to be your voice in this Parliament. I carry your hopes, your frustrations, and your priorities into everything I do in this place. You've given me a mandate to be your voice, your advocate, and your defender. I carry that duty into this chamber with great responsibility and deep humility. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's get to the heart of this bill, but more importantly, let's get to what's missing from it. While the government may be eager to pat itself on the back, Canadians deserve to know that this bill stops short of promises made in the speech from the throne and doing what's actually needed to protect them. In the throne speech, the government said that they would bring a renewed focus on car theft and home invasions by toughening the criminal code to make bail harder to get for repeat offenders charged with committing these crimes, along with human trafficking and drug smuggling. Yet none of this is to be found anywhere in all 172 pages of this bill. It's as if they've been tone deaf to the pleas of premiers, law enforcement, and victims who have been demanding bail reform for well over 3 years. While there are pieces that may be helpful, these are small steps in a system that's already broken at its foundation after a decade of soft on crime laws. This bill may tighten a few screws around the edges, but ignores the structural damage done by the Liberals' own justice reforms. It doesn't touch bail, not once. Not a word about repealing or reforming the principle of restraint that's allowing repeat violent offenders back out on the street before the ink is even dry on their charge sheets. Not a word about empowering Crown attorneys to actually keep dangerous individuals behind bars. Not a word about protecting victims from seeing their attacker back in their neighborhood hours after an arrest. That revolving door opened by Bill C-75 is still spinning, and the bill does nothing to stop it. It doesn't touch sentencing either. The Liberals talk a big game about cracking down on traffickers, smugglers, and organized crime, but they've kept in place their signature legislation, Bill C-5, which stripped away mandatory minimum sentences for the very criminals they now claim to be targeting. The bill doesn't bring back any of those minimums. It doesn't impose serious time for serious crimes, and it doesn't deliver justice for the victims who've been left behind, even in the middle of a national fentanyl crisis that is taking thousands of Canadian lives every single year. Those traffickers are pumping lethal drugs into our communities, often with links to organized crime and foreign cartels, are still eligible for light sentence, in some cases conditional releases, which is a form of a house arrest. And it certainly doesn't send a message to the organized criminals that are exploiting our legal system, flooding our streets with fentanyl and laundering their dirty money across borders, that their time is up. Mr. Speaker, this is a missed opportunity, a chance to clean up the mess they've created. But here's the reality right now in Canada. Violent crime up 50% in this country. Homicides up 28%. Sexual assaults up 74%. Auto theft up 46%. Extortion a whopping 357%. Gang-related homicides up 78%. Violent crimes with guns up 116%. Terrorism charges up 488%. and hate crimes have more than tripled. Those are the tragic stats that show the disheartening reality right now in this country. And while the crime crisis sweeps across our country, what this bill really does, beneath all the legal jargon and bureaucratic language, is keep the worst parts of the Liberals' justice record firmly intact. It keeps Bill 75, the law that tied the hands of police and prosecutors and told judges to favor release over detention, even when dealing with repeat violent offenders. It keeps the so-called principle of restraint that's allowed known gang members, gun criminals, and repeat abusers to walk free before even officers finish their paperwork. It told Canadians that violent history doesn't matter, that past behavior shouldn't prejudice future bail decisions. And what has been the result? Repeat offenders back on our streets. Arrests made in the morning, criminals out before the officer even finishes their shift. But the bill doesn't touch that law. It keeps it in place, and by doing so, it keeps that revolving door spinning. It keeps Bill C-5, the Liberals' flagship soft-on-crime legislation that wiped out mandatory minimum sentences for some of the most serious offenses in the criminal code. We're talking about drug trafficking, gun smuggling, armed robbery, repeat violent offenses. Instead of sending a message that these crimes carry consequences, Bill C-5 says you might be eligible for house arrest. That's the message fentanyl dealers and gang leaders heard loud and clear, and now, even in the middle of the worst drug crisis our country has ever seen, this government refuses to put those minimums back in place. The very offenders we should be locking away are still being given second, third, and fourth chances, and this government calls that justice. And while the bill claims to be a response to growing threats at the border from organized crime and transnational drug trafficking, it doesn't say a single word about reversing the same Liberal policies that got us here in the first place. You can tighten custom inspections, but if the trafficker is still released on bail within 24 hours, if the fentanyl producer still walks away with time served, if the gun smuggler knows there's no minimum sentence waiting at the end of the line, then what exactly are we doing as legislators? Without serious bail reform, without mandatory minimums, without real consequences for serious crimes, the system is still broken. These are the same policies that let fentanyl traffickers off. Fentanyl is a public health crisis. It's a criminal epidemic being driven by organized crime, enabled by weak laws, and made worse by a justice system that fails to deliver real consequences. We are losing more than 20 Canadians every single day to opiate overdoses, and fentanyl is the center of it. It is cheap, it is lethal, it is everywhere. And behind most every fatal dose is a trafficker, a producer, or a cartel that profits from death and misery. Yet despite the crisis, the bill says nothing, does nothing, and fixes nothing when it comes to holding fentanyl traffickers truly accountable. Let me remind this House of what happened last year in Falkland, British Columbia, where the RCMP dismantled the largest and most sophisticated illegal drug lab ever uncovered in Canadian history. What they found, Mr. Speaker, was shocking. 54 kilograms of finished fentanyl, 390 kilograms of methamphetamine, 89 illegal firearms, and $500,000 in cash, all inside a rural compound operating under the radar. To put that seizure into perspective, those 54 kilograms of fentanyl were enough to create over 95 million lethal doses. That's enough, Mr. Speaker, to kill every Canadian in this country twice over. This was not a low-level street dealer. This was not some desperate individual struggling with addiction. This was a high-level, professional drug production operation. It had all the markings of transactional organized crime, and the RCMP confirmed direct links to Mexican cartels, the same cartels responsible for mass killings, political assassinations, and destabilizing entire countries. Now they're operating here on Canadian soil, building super labs and churning out poison every day. And yet there is no mention of mandatory life sentences for those who operate fentanyl labs capable of killing millions. And the message is clear here, Mr. Speaker. Prior to the passage of Bill C-5, there was a mandatory minimum penalty for those producers, those manufacturers, those importers, those exporters, those traffickers. But according to this liberal, soft-on-crime government, that was too draconian of a law. It had to be repealed. There's been no effort to bring back mandatory minimum sentences for large-scale drug production or trafficking. There is no recognition in this bill that Canada's criminal justice system needs to change to meet the scale and violence of this threat. What message does that send? To the cartels watching us from across the border, it says Canada is easy money. To the low and mid-level traffickers in this country, they've got a big smile on their face that this weak, soft-on-crime government is now back in Ottawa. To the fentanyl traffickers, it says, you'll get a deal, maybe even a conditional sentence. And to the victims, to the thousands of parents bearing their children, to the first responders administering naloxone day after day, to the communities being hollowed out by addiction and death, it says your pain isn't enough to warrant serious change by this weak government. Mr. Speaker, that is not acceptable. When a criminal operation can manufacture enough fentanyl to wipe out the entire country and still not face life in prison, something is deeply broken. And criminals have taken note. The RCMP now says there are more than 2,000 organized crime groups operating in this country. What good is controlling fentanyl precursors if we're not throwing the book at criminals making it? What good is data sharing if repeat offenders are out on bail before the paperwork is even processed? What good is fighting crime on paper if the sentences handed down in court don't match the seriousness and the moral culpability of the offender? Mr. Speaker, this bill is a good starting point, but it's simply not enough. For all the government's talk, for all the legal language and administrative tweaks buried in all 127 pages, it still fails to deal with the single most urgent problem we face in this country: violent, repeat offenders who face no real consequences under the government's so-called justice reforms. This is the crisis Canadians live with every single day on their streets, on our transit systems, in their neighborhoods, in their homes. Canadians are seeing criminals cycle in and out of jail like it's a revolving door, and we're being told that is progress. Canadians don't want more promises with headlines, they want results. They want their kids to walk to school without fear. They want fentanyl dealers to face real prison time, not house arrest and a slap on the wrist. They want to see gang members and gun runners behind bars, not out on bail within hours. They want a justice system that puts their safety first, not a system that prioritizes the release of repeat offenders. The bill does not deliver. Instead, it leaves untouched the broken laws that started this crisis and refuses to bring back protections Canadians and law enforcement has been demanding for years. Canadians are right to ask, why haven't the Liberals brought back mandatory minimums for fentanyl traffickers? After the largest fentanyl bust in Canadian history, with enough poison to kill the entire population, why are life sentences still off the table? Why is the principle of restraint, which prioritizes releasing offenders over protecting communities, still baked into our bail system? How many more innocent Canadians need to be attacked, robbed, or killed before this government admits that their soft on crime approach has significantly failed Canadians? Why are we tiptoeing around the rights of traffickers, gang members, and repeat violent offenders while law-abiding citizens pay the price in blood, trauma, and fear? Mr. Speaker, the bill focuses on border security and public safety, but completely fails to deliver on core fundamentals. Conservatives have long called for decisive action to protect Canada's borders. For years, we've urged this Liberal government to fix the border crisis that they created, yet they ignored the warnings and failed to act. The fundamentals are clear. If we want safer communities, we need tougher sentences for serious crimes. If we want to stop organized crime, we need real punishment for drug traffickers, not plea deals. If we want to stop repeat violence, we need to end the revolving door of bail. And if we want, most importantly, to restore trust in our justice system, we need to stop coddling criminals and start standing up for victims. The bill, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, does none of these things. It fixes the optics but leaves the core problem untouched. And it offers minor changes when what we need is structural reform. It fails to reverse the damage done by Bills C-75 and C-5. It fails to recognize that organized crime is not a future threat. It's here now and has been so for many, many years. It fails to respond to the fentanyl crisis with the seriousness it demands. It fails to protect Canadians while crime surges in every category. Canadians are demanding real change, and they're right to. Mandatory minimums must be restored for serious gun and drug offenses. Fentanyl traffickers and cartel-connected criminals should face mandatory life in prison, no exceptions, full stop. The so-called principle of restraint has to be repealed so repeat violent offenders stay behind bars where they belong. What this country needs is a justice system that protects victims, enforces accountability, and puts public safety first before political ideology. Because keeping Canadians safe isn't negotiable. It's the prime responsibility of a government. Conservatives are committed to real, results-driven public safety measures. That means securing our borders, closing loopholes in our immigration system, and shutting down the financial lifelines of terrorism and organized crime. Let's not forget why we're here in the first place, Mr. Speaker. The bill only exists because of 10 years of Liberal inaction. The bill only exists because they have problems dealing with the American administration in the South. For a decade, they've watched crime rise and courts weaken. Since the Liberals took office, illegal border activity hasn't just risen, it's exploded. There's been a 632% increase in U.S. Border Patrol encounters with people crossing illegally from Canada. That's not just a stat, it's a failure of national security. It's what happens when the government refuses to enforce its own borders and let crisis become the norm, the status quo. The Liberals say they're investing $300 million in border security, but where is it? No rollout plan, no timeline, no public accountability, just more vague promises. Canadians are tired of the talk. Opposition members are tired of this talk. They want action. They want to see trust. Now, we can't protect Canadians by turning law-abiding citizens into suspects. The expanded surveillance powers in this bill raise very serious privacy concerns. Conservatives will ensure that in the name of security, we're not trampling on the rights of innocent Canadians. We can be tough on crime without being reckless at the same time with civil liberties. But our job doesn't end at opposing what's wrong. It's about pushing for what's right. Conservatives will keep fighting for real protection at our borders, stronger enforcement at our ports, and sentencing that reflects the seriousness of the crimes Canadians face. The goal isn't just to punish crime, it's to prevent it and to restore trust in a system that too often lets people down. Because justice in this country shouldn't be optional, public safety should never be negotiable, and because the rights of law-abiding Canadians must always come before the rights of repeat offenders. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Secretary of State combating crime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate that the member hardly spoke about anything that is in this bill. I think he is awaiting the forthcoming justice bill that we will be introducing. I believe he could use this speech at that time because that justice bill will include many of these measures. But I do want to talk about some things that we can constructively work on. And one thing is that this bill exists because there were gaps. These gaps also existed under previous Conservative governments. Under previous Conservative governments, there was no limit on how much cash could be spent on goods in this country. There weren't these provisions. It was the same immigration rules as well. And so this bill exists because this new Liberal government is getting tough on crime and recognizes that we need to fill the gaps in order to keep Canadians safe. Would you agree?
Through the chair, the honourable member for Brantford, Brant South, Six Nations.
Through the chair, Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely laughable whenever I and my colleagues hear about this brand new Liberal government. My God, the member that just asked me the question has been here literally since 2015. She's not new. 90% of that bench is all old. It's being controlled by the same Liberal operation that's been in existence since 2015. And you know, when are they finally going to start reflecting and looking themselves in the mirror to say, hey, we have failed Canadians, we have let them down, we failed to protect our borders, we've let repeat violent offenders in and out of the criminal justice system blame themselves. Shame on them for blaming Stephen Harper and the past Conservative government that actually cared about victims over the rights of criminals.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable député de Gaspésie.
The Honourable Member for Gaspésie, Les Îles de la Madeleine, Listigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question for my colleague who is very critical of the bill. He spoke about unity when it comes to fentanyl trafficking. The changes to the Canada Post Act will allow Canada Post workers to open not only packages but also letters when they have grounds to suspect that something is amiss. How does my colleague feel about that? Would this be a useful way to fight drug trafficking and especially fentanyl trafficking?
And I know some members on the Liberal bench are tired of hearing this, but it's important to frame the response. And, you know, the member for Waterloo loves to chime, and maybe she'll get the opportunity to ask me a question, but perhaps she can show me the courtesy of actually responding to the question without being chirped and interrupted. But as you're doing right now, in my previous capacity, Mr. Speaker, not only was I a prosecutor, I was a defense counsel. And I will fight with every last breath the charter rights, freedoms of every Canadian. And what I find very, very concerning is that there ought not to be a choice, as this government has framed Bill C-2, a choice between protecting civil liberties and law enforcement. And I'm sure I'm going to hear a question about, oh, but all the police associations are all in favor of Bill C-2. Well, of course they are. They've been pleading and begging for some legislative relief from this government for 10 years. So it's one small step.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate the member on his speech and his excellent work on this. One of the things I noticed talking to people in my riding and in other places during the election was just how frustrating it is for people who work in law enforcement when they see the failures on crime of this Liberal government. You've got people who go out, work hard every day, risking their lives to try to keep the rest of us safe. And that when they catch someone involved in crime, very often they're released on bail, even if it's a repeat violent offender. I wonder if the member can share just a little bit about how the approach the Liberals have taken is impacting law enforcement and what the response has been to the actions of this government by those who work on the front lines.
Member for Brantford, Brant South, Six Nations.
I thank my colleague for that excellent question, Mr. Speaker. In my capacity as a shadow critic for Justice and the Attorney General, a position that I've had for almost a year now, I've had the opportunity of traveling right across this great country. I have spoken with local law enforcement. I have spoken with presidents of police associations. I've spoken with chiefs. I've spoken with provincial and territorial attorney generals. They are all unanimous in their frustration with this Liberal government. The Liberal government promised them real substantive bail reform. They were so proud when Bill C-48 was passed into law, which was nothing more than a Band-Aid on a serious issue. They are frustrated, they are demoralized, they want more relief that this government refuses to give.
Questions and comments? We'll go to the member for Waterloo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I regret that the member feels that he's being chirped. I was actually just participating in the comments that were being shared. And where I think I'm coming from is that this legislation, at least in the riding of Waterloo, it's not a monolith of voices. People are interested in this legislation. Today we heard from speeches from actually colleagues of the Conservative Party as well as the Bloc suggesting this legislation did have some ability, amendments could be considered, but there was value to the legislation. It just isn't exactly in the way that some members would like to see it. I recognize that there is more work to do. What I would like to hear from the member, is there merits for this legislation? If police associations are asking for it, we are providing it. Is there merits to this legislation? Should we try to make it better? Should we try to improve? And now you see the... Okay, thank you.
Order. The honourable member for Brantford, Brant South, Six Nations.
Mr. Speaker, as I said in my response to my last question, law enforcement have long asked for a number of legislative reforms. What Bill C-2 does is it moves the needle ever so slightly by expanding the search powers that police officers have when they are investigating sophisticated transnational organized crime entities, the fentanyl traffickers that I told you about, but still at the expense of civil liberties. You know, this government still hasn't produced a charter statement, which is astonishing. But the whole purpose behind this, defense lawyers, Mr. Speaker, are laughing, they're smiling, they're going to be smiling all the way to the bank as they launch charter challenge.
We're trying to get two more brief questions. The member for Courtney Alberni, a brief 30-second question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we've heard this government, they've announced a fentanyl czar. They've had an auto theft summit. I'm not saying that that's not important. But, Mr. Speaker, they still haven't named a czar to help support those living with addiction. They still haven't announced a plan on how they're going to create treatment on demand. They still haven't had a summit on the toxic drug crisis, despite the loss of over 50,000 Canadians. Through you, Mr. Speaker, did my colleague agree that those also need to be a priority when it comes to this discussion?
Member for Brantford, Brant, Six Nations, 30 seconds.
I thank my NDP member for that excellent question and great observation. Where is the Minister for Addictions? We had it in the 44th, but clearly not a priority for the Prime Minister and his so-called new government. As I indicated in my speech, we have got a fentanyl national crisis. People are dying every day. There's blood on the hands of all of those Liberal members for showing such disrespect to those struggling with these addiction measures to ensure that there's adequate representation at a national level.
Question et commentaire.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Salaberry-Soulanges. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was just wondering, I know that my colleague has some type of affection or concern, rather, for firearms. I'd like him to explain, and if in his opinion, in C-2, they talk about more power to the Coast Guard to document and observe situations. Does he think this is a good tool to hunt illegal arms?
A very quick response from the member for Brantford.
Yes, I do believe that there is value in arming our Coast Guard. with additional powers. I toured the Port of Vancouver recently, Mr. Speaker, and I was appalled to learn of the clever ways that criminals and organized crime are smuggling drugs and weapons into our border with basically zero ability of the Coast Guard and law enforcement.
That does bring us to the end of that time.